Today, we're going to be talking about the NHS strike that is going on over in the UK, where pretty much almost 100,000 nurses are going on a historic strike. It's the biggest strike they have seen. I've never seen one over there. They've seen in history. We're going to be talking today. We have Nurse Adrian, who has kindly set up this interview. We have someone who works in the NHS system. You know Adrian from our panel discussions. She is a huge patient advocate and a nurse. And we will be joined, like I said, from a nurse in the NHS, which is awesome. So we will be discussing the strike. It's ongoing. They've already had one day and they have another one on Tuesday, the 20th. What the strike is, why they're doing it, what they're hoping to get out of it, and then a comparison to of unions in the United States versus in England, kind of what it's like to work in the NHS system. We kind of went over the whole thing, how much you make. This is a two-part series. Number one is we'll start on my channel, and then we will come and finish up over on Adrian's, where we talk a lot more about we kind of just split it in half. So stick through this one, get to the end, hop over to Adrian's channel, and we can hop into the interview now. Okay, and here we are. We have Siobhan with us. And do you want to introduce yourself really quick and just tell us a little bit about you and how we're very lucky to be in your presence, because you've got quite a activism, Twitter, all the things. You're doing all the things.
So my name is Siobhan Aston. I am a staff nurse in Scotland and a campaigner with the movement NHS Workers Say No. And that is why I'm mildly Twitter famous, mildly.
And so tell us a little bit about how you started the campaign and how it began.
So initially, during the pandemic, I think around about June 2020, the UK government announced a pay rise for doctors and dentists. And this caused an absolute outrage amongst nurses. And so nurses and a nurse lecturer, there were 5 founders of the campaign, they launched a protest, and essentially the anger amongst nurses across the whole of the United Kingdom meant that it went from one protest to something like 42. And on August in 2020, about 40 odd cities came out in protest for the campaign. And it's been working ever since towards getting nurses fair pay rises in the UK and pay restoration, which I'll go on to explain a bit more shortly.
That's awesome. So you're saying that there's across the UK, Scotland, Wales, England, North Ireland, you have chapters of this group? Is it?
Yeah. So what I would say is there are probably the majority of the group is based in England. There is offshoots of it in Scotland and not so much in Northern Ireland. And there is a couple in Wales, I think around Cardiff, which, the kind of biggest city in Wales. And so, yeah, there's connections for the campaign really all over the UK with the exception of Northern Ireland. But we all form one kind of cohesive group, which operates through the Facebook account, the Twitter account, and we have a WhatsApp as well, so that we can coordinate all our actions across the United Kingdom.
That's
Sounds
incredible.
like we have a lot we could learn in this country from
grassroots, right?
You've been able to pull together and do something, and it's working.
Yeah.
Could you tell us just a tiny bit from a bird's eye view for those of us in other countries, what the NHS is in general? Because today we're obviously talking about the strike that is going on, kind of the reasons for that, and just a picture from obviously someone who's living with it. Could you just back up a minute and tell us, who are a little bit more ignorant about it, what the NHS is, how it compares? Is it the same within Scotland and then versus England, or does it all cohesively do its thing, or that?
Yeah, good question. So the NHS, other people probably know, the National Health Service in the UK. It's quite a well-known organisation because 10 years ago, I think we were ranked among the top 5 health services in the whole world. The NHS was formed in 1948, and the concept behind it after the war was to give access to everyone, access to healthcare regardless of your background or your income. The NHS would be there for you. Famously, this expression, from the cradle to the grave.
That's very nice. It's a nice concept. So fair to say the NHS is it is more of a single payer healthcare system that everyone can access type of
Yeah.
situation.
So everyone pays their taxes, and when we need to go to a doctor, there's no money involved. If you need to go to a hospital, you don't need to present a card for a health insurer or anything like that. It's just an expectation that you go and you just are able to access whatever you need.
What a concept. No one can tell at all how I feel about it.
So no copays, right? Is that what you're saying? There's not, well, we would have like copays or something, or $10.
No copays. There's no money involved. You are taxed when you earn your wages. You're taxed then, and then that's it. There's no money involved whatsoever. So if you need medication, Scotland is slightly different from the rest of the UK. We don't pay for medication here at all. So if you need, some people are exempt anyway. We did used to have charges for medication or prescriptions. It used to be maybe about, I think about $10. The equivalent would be about £6-7 over here. But Scotland is, I'd say, slightly more left-leaning. And years back, they abolished medication charges. So it used to be you would be exempt, for example, if you relied on medication for life-saving reasons. So diabetics, they never had to pay for insulin because you need it to live. But
yes, you do.
But yeah, they extended that to everyone because I think they recognised that people wouldn't necessarily be compliant for the medication that they needed because they had to prioritise between, heating or buying food. So they took that out of the equation and made it so that the one thing you don't have to worry about is your medicine.
Yeah. Well,
so it sounds like the model is that, to have a successful country, you have to have healthy people and people not having to make those difficult choices of, like in America, somebody, may choose to work a certain job to get health insurance versus doing something else. And maybe that cuts into innovation, actually, because that person might be the creator of something incredible, but they went and got a job at, someplace with health insurance.
That's obviously not something that we need to take into account because everyone has access to healthcare. So when you are choosing an employer, you're choosing it purely for the reason that you want to work with them, not necessarily because of any extra benefits that they provide,
Gotcha. And then can you talk a little bit about the formation of the unions that represent the workers and a little bit about that history and how that all came about?
So I can only really tell you that the Royal College of Nursing, I believe, has been running for over 100 years. That's the union that I'm a member of. There has been multiple different unions over, I'd say, the past 5 decades. Some of them have closed down and essentially merged. I believe Unison is actually, which is another major union, I believe they're actually more than one union that decided to just merge years ago. But yeah, the Royal College has been running for over, I think it's like 105 years now, actually.
That's impressive.
But I'd say there's 4, what I would class as the 4 big players in healthcare here is the Royal College, Unison, Unite and GMB. They're the 4 that I would say. There is other ones that are maybe slightly more specialised. So, for example, the Royal College of Midwives have their own union. And you've got chartered physiotherapists, podiatry. So there is other smaller health unions. But if we're talking about the 4 major players, it would be the 4.
And are those all nursing unions?
Opinion.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Are those all nursing or does that kind of span all of healthcare?
So yes, I think all of the unions I've just mentioned do take nurses on. But I would say the predominant nursing union is the Royal College of Nursing here.
Okay. And is that something that you decide to join? Like everyone gets to individually pick, or is it kind of based on, everyone can kind of decide if they want to join it?
So for example, when I was a student nurse, the unions come to is it freshman week?
Yeah, like your first year?
Yeah, they come to that and they'll say, look, you should join us. And normally the way that people join them is they're offering a free nursing dictionary or a fob watch or free pens.
Yeah, all you really need.
Yeah, in the beginning, that is how you would choose. And most people, it have to be said, maybe don't think particularly much about which union they join. Once they've joined, that's it. But then, as maybe they don't agree with union decisions, they may switch to a different union. And I think we're seeing that happening right now, actually, in the UK for nurses.
Interesting.
So, meaning that if I'm working at, Hospital X, there could be members of all 4 unions in that one workplace negotiating. Okay, so that's a really different model than in the United States. Here we have that would not happen. It wouldn't even be legal. So we have what's called the National Labor Relations Board, and they have defined what's called bargaining units. And so there's 7 major bargaining units in healthcare. Nurses are their own bargaining unit, but LVNs or LPNs would be in what's called the technical bargaining unit with radiograph folks, radiology, respiratory therapists, technical fields. Think of people that might need a year or 2 for education. Then there's professional bargaining unit, which might be people that require a 4-year degree or more, like pharmacists, physical therapists, recreation therapists. And then there's service workers who would be maybe your kitchen, your phlebotomists, your CNAs. And so it kind of goes like that. And then there's like a business office kind of secretarial group. Now, everybody can be in one union though, in one bargaining unit. If they choose to. It's a little more complicated, but by and large, how it's evolved in America is nurses are in their own union, and they might have another union in the same facility, but that's going to represent the LVNs, the technical, everybody else. And so they would be maybe different unions. It could be the same union. I used to work for the largest union in America, and we would try to do what we call wall to wall, like everybody. From the secretaries to the nurses, everyone. And usually it's called union shop. So in different states, the regulations are different in America. So each state kind of has its own laws. So in some states, you can have what's called union shop, which means you automatically have to be a member or you cannot be employed. So you can choose to be a fee payer, which means you still pay the dues, but you have to designate those dues to go to a nonprofit, and then you don't have rights of arbitration. So there's really no point in doing that because you lose a lot of legal protection. So that's just a little primer on the difference in America, how that works.
Yeah, that sounds infinitely different to how it's done over here. You don't have to join a union. I know many people that aren't union members actually within the area that I work, which, I'm always like, right, come on now. Like, you should join a union because the more of us there are, the stronger our position is. But I'm also of the opinion that a lot of people that don't join the union think, let's say, for example, something happened in your job. Who is going to defend your rights as a worker if you don't have a trade union?
Yep.
Right. So to me, that's a major reason to join. But a lot of people that do join see that as the end game, and they never become involved, in a wider way. And I think that's a lot of the problem. There's a lot of apathy until it comes to a situation like we're in now in the UK, where inflation is spiralling and we've got a cost of living crisis, energy crisis. And then it's like, oh, look, everyone's woken up. We need to get involved with the trade union. You know what I mean? So it's good that there's something that triggers that. There's a catalyst. But I wish that interest was there all the time.
Yeah, rather than going into it when it's annoying versus like, oh my gosh, everything is on fire. Like, this is a problem. Like, this is not good. Do you think most people would you say most nurses are in a union, or is the majority not in a union?
I would say, I think the majority of nurses are in a union. Yeah, I think of the nurses I've spoken to, I'd say, if you were asking me to guess, 90% are. Because they recognise that something could.
Yeah.
I think as well, because nurses, they have more responsibility clinically, it makes even more sense for them to have some kind of legal protection if it was ever needed. Yeah.
Yeah. And one more background thing, just to kind of get an idea. When you go to get a job, So in the US, you would go to a certain hospital and they would offer you this package that was going to be very different than the hospital that's next door. The pay is going to be different. The benefits of like time off and yada yada are going to be different. Is
Okay.
that the same situation within the NHS, or is it more like you work here, but like we kind of have a pay scale that's very uniform
Yeah.
between institutions?
So that's a good question. So really, generally speaking, across the UK, the terms and conditions are identical.
Interesting.
Okay, so if you, generally speaking, are an NHS nurse and you work in England,
Mm-hmm.
you get the same amount of days off, like annual leave, holidays, as nurses in Wales will, as nurses in Scotland will, as nurses in Northern Ireland will. Where there is a slight difference is that in Scotland we are slightly, and I do mean slightly, higher paid. Maybe, I think the difference is about £1,500 a year,
Okay.
because our government's given slightly bigger pay rises.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, generally the conditions are exactly the same no matter where you go to work.
Interesting. So that kind of makes it, levels that playing field and makes the
Yeah.
hospital. How do you decide then where you want to work? Is it just kind of like some hospitals just treat people nicer or have different ratios, or?
Well, how I decided where I wanted to work was I wanted to work in the town that I grew up in. I thought that would be
There you
nice.
go. Yeah. There you go. So you
Yeah.
can make more of an organic decision of I want to serve the
Yeah.
population that I live amongst
Yeah,
versus,
exactly. I like the idea of working on the hospital around where I grew up. So I made the decision that way because it's also financially sensible for commuting to work.
Yeah.
And also, I don't work in an acute hospital. So we have acute hospitals and then we've got ones that are maybe more long-term care.
Mm-hmm.
So that would involve things like rehab nursing, which is the kind of nurse that I am. And so a lot of people would make the decision based on, say, if you were an emergency department nurse, then you would work in one of the acute hospitals in the area because there's maybe only within 30 miles 3 emergency departments. So it makes the decision pretty easy.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So it sounds more of like I would like to do this and this is where I would like to work versus here where you'll get a job sometimes an hour away because they're offering better pay and better benefits and you'll go and
Yeah.
drive to go and
Yeah.
find that. Okay, that's
Yeah.
interesting. And how long have you been a nurse?
So I qualified in 2014.
Okay.
I took a couple of years out when I qualified because my dad died unexpectedly
Oh,
of
I'm
cancer.
sorry.
Yeah, it was a really rough time because he was only 56.
Oh my
And the last thing I wanted to do was set foot in a hospital after that.
Oh
So
yeah. No.
I nearly actually walked away from nursing completely at that point because I thought, yeah, don't think I can do this. And then the way that it works in the UK is if you don't practice within 3 years of qualifying, you would need to go back and do a return to practice, which is like 3 months working again, being supervised to make sure you're still competent. So when 2 years hit, I decided, right, this is not what my dad would want. I need to try because I had developed a real level of anxiety about whether or not I would be good enough to be able to do the job. But I went into a scheme for like an internship is the way that I would explain it. So it meant that for the first 3 months, I had much heavier emotional support and clinical support just to get up and running. And if it had been for that, I don't think I would be a nurse now. So it's now been nearly 6 years. And yeah, I'm really grateful that scheme existed. And here I am.
That's awesome.
I bet they wish they hadn't taken me on, but here I am.
Well, I bet your patients are glad they did. And all the people that are being positively affected by everything you're doing now are certainly benefiting from it. Yeah. Have you seen things? How have you seen? So, like, I would say, in my experience, when I started, I've been a nurse for 10 years and things were not quite so chaotic, like stressful or like angsty, angry. I felt like I was treated a little bit better and it's kind of gone like, is that similar to your experience or has yours been totally different?
So what I would say is the problems in the National Health Service probably predate me coming into it. So I'm not sure I notice it in the same way that some of the nurses I speak to who've been doing it maybe 30 years have seen a totally, like a change in the culture a decline in nurse to patient ratios, that kind of thing. I think, me personally, the area that I work in, I'm quite fortunate. I don't experience the same levels of difficulty that some of our other national health nurses do. Sometimes it's just the luck of where you work and what staff they have available. And I think, like, working in a good environment with a team that you get on well with, it makes a difference, So
for sure.
I think it is better for me, but I am the exception rather than the rule. It's not that we don't see any of the same systemic issues. We do. Staffing is a problem. We are hugely, hugely short of nurses in the UK, but I don't think it's specifically the UK. I think there's a worldwide crisis in nursing. People don't want to go into a job that's got such significant responsibility. The mental load, it's going to put a lot of people into, I would say, a poor state of physical or mental health, because the job is very demanding. And I think people are looking at the pay and saying, why would I do that? I can, like, if you're going to go and get a degree, you might be interested in more than one thing. So you look at the wages for nursing, and it's not a very attractive prospect. So you're going to go train and do something else. And I think that's what we're seeing. And I think that's what we're seeing the world over.
Yeah. And that's kind of, I think, leading up to primarily, right, what we're seeing in terms of the strike that's happening is people just being like, you have to treat us better. Like, obviously we're in a crisis here and we have this. And just before we dive in, because I think that's a good thing to start, like, diving into that and looking at the reasons really of it. What is it, the Royal College of Nursing, right, that's striking? Or is it other unions too, or just that? Okay, so it's that one.
There is, I believe that GMB is also having strikes. I think Unison has a small number of areas, and I think it's mainly ambulance workers.
Okay.
But in terms of the nurses strike, it's the Royal College of Nursing that is probably the one you're seeing all over the headlines right now.
Yeah.
Now, does that include, because it's a National Health Service, so this includes outpatient setting like clinics, long-term care homes, acute care hospitals?
Not care homes. No, care homes are, I think they used to be owned by local government, but most of them, I believe, are private businesses, care homes. So care home nurses aren't really in this dispute. It's National Health Service nurses specifically, but it does affect all areas. We have a process, and I know we were talking about this, I think, last week on TikTok. We have a process here called derogation. And what that means is, if you're on strike, the union will exempt certain areas because we provide life and limb cover. So in other words, we will not jeopardise people's safety where possible, although it is being jeopardised in the system every single day, that needs to be said. But we will try and provide what we class as life and limb cover. So intensive care, completely derogated, so exempt from strike action. Paediatric, A&E or emergency department, exempted. And then in other areas, we have what you class as kind of two tiers of derogation by the looks of it. One is they will say, obviously there's patients in there, so you can't just close down because there's nowhere for a lot of them to go. Social care, that's a whole other conversation. So what they would say is, how many staff do you use on a night shift or on Christmas Day? Because that's or bank holidays. And then you will either be allocated that you're allowed so many staff based on those answers, and then everyone else is allowed to come out and strike. It's still up to the individual. So, for example, let's say they said to me, your service is allowed 3 trained nurses. I could still, as an individual, say, on principle, I don't want to be derogated, and they could try and find someone else. So you still have the choice, but the idea is we don't just walk out and leave the public to fend for themselves. Yeah.
Okay. And so that's kind of different than how we do it here, which I think Adrian can probably speak to. But here, so it sounds like you're running on what we would call a skeleton crew. Like, bare bones. What can we do? No outside entity comes in and fills the holes. It's just kind of like, this is going to be a rough 12 hours.
So skeleton. But here's the thing. and this is definitely has to be mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
the staffing in that situation is often better than the everyday staffing that people have.
How do they accommodate that then? How do they create a better staffing? I mean, because here in America, right? So say we'd go on a 4-day strike. I can tell you it would be absolutely instrumental to have the emergency department, critical care and surgery, the departments that run that bring the money in to come out. Those are the most important departments to have in a union.
Right.
And that, but then, you know, we have a different model here where there can be replacement nurses brought in that an extremely high rate. The hotels are paid for, their transportation's paid for, their food. I mean, strikes cost hospitals a lot of money if they don't negotiate, right? That's the whole idea of the leverage. And usually the unions will, I know in my case, we would say, well, if there's absolutely an emergency and you need, you know, a specialized nurse, you can contact the union and we will sanction nurses to come back in. I can tell you in the history of 20 years in the union, I've never had that happen because the hospitals are just basically like, you know, sawed off and we don't want you back. You know, they don't want to, they never take us up on that offer, even though on the public area, they will, you know, cry foul.
Right, okay. So in a way, that's dirty tactics they're using against you because they're implying that you're standing by and letting this happen, when in reality you've said, if you really need someone, we will send someone in. But you know yourself how the propaganda machine works. The difference, I think, between your system and ours is your bargaining tool is that's a business losing money unless they negotiate over salary. Here, the negotiating tool is the British public are behind us. So they are going to get pressure from the public to make a decent pay offer, get the nurses back in working, because obviously this affects public services. Even though we're providing life and limb and we're looking after the people on a skeleton kind of basis that are already in the hospitals, things like outpatient clinics and surgeries, that affects the British public. That means they need to wait longer. So the people who are behind us, they will put pressure on the government. So that's our bargaining tool.
Yeah. And how do they do that? I mean, so do you all like say, hey, contact this council person or this representative and do a letter writing campaign, an email campaign, phone calls? Do you get the public out with you to demonstrate and picket?
Yes. So initially, when the campaign that I started out with first formed, that was one of the things that we done. We said to people, write to your local member of parliament and tell them that you believe in a decent wage for NHS workers. So that's something the public got involved in. There's ongoing campaigns for that because obviously members of parliament do have to take into account what their constituents feel is important in the country. So that's one of the things that we've done. But personally, I've tried to educate the public for the past couple of years on why I think restorative pay awards are very important in the National Health Service, and tried to encourage people to get involved in our Twitter storms and how they can support people in the picket line, because these are the first nationwide strikes in nursing since 1988.
Wow.
So a lot of people have never seen this. They've never been involved in it. So there's an education process which is ongoing for all of us. We're all learning together here. The only people that know what this is like is the nurses that have been here literally pre-1988 who maybe were out on those strikes. So we learn from them as well, because they can tell us how it worked, what didn't go well, and hopefully how we can, have a more effective strike this time.
Yeah. Well, do you think, so I follow a few people who live in the UK and they've all been posting in the last few days, like very pro nursing type of things, like, supporting our nurses, we need to blah, blah, blah. But that's obviously a terrible sample size. Do you feel like the population in general does support nurses, or is it twisted into why are you being greedy?
I'm glad you asked that, actually, because if you were to look at the media, you would get the impression that there is a lot of hostility towards us. And I really do not think that is the case. Not in my experience in the past couple of years campaigning. I would say that 3/4 of the public are behind us. Maybe even more, actually.
That's awesome.
So it's a lot about how the media present it. So they will go out of their way to find, say, for example, a nurse who doesn't support striking. And you better believe they're going to get that nurse on the television to say about how she thinks it's terrible and selfish, and that's not why we came into the job. And like, okay, I respect everyone is entitled to an opinion. I genuinely do. But it does create a skewed perception out with the UK, because if that's what you're seeing in the media, then you're going to think, oh, they're up against it.
Yeah. And that's very interesting, because when I was looking at it this morning, there was about equal, if not tipped in the direction of nurses are evil articles out there of interviewing, you know, an older gentleman who like had to have his surgery postponed, and like one saying like, you're going to bankrupt our entire healthcare system. Like, on and on. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like, so that's interesting that the perception is so different than what is being presented.
Yeah, because obviously the people that run the media, they are well represented by government, you know, their financial interests. So it is in their interest to put it out there, you know, that we're going to be responsible for these cutbacks or changes in the standards of patient care. No, absolutely not. Things have been going downhill for a long time because the service has not been getting the funding that it needs for really around at least a decade, I would say. Coincidentally, also, that's the amount of time that the Conservative Party have been our government. They are not pro-NHS, it has to be said. They will claim that they are because the NHS is... how would I put that? The NHS is like a key thing that almost every party would campaign on what they're going to do for it, because they represent the value that it gives to everyone in the UK. So no party would ever come out and say we're going to privatise it. Well, I don't think they would. I could never imagine that. If they were going to do it, they would have to do it by stealth, you know, because the public, there would be an uproar, because we value, I mean, I'm a nurse, but as a citizen in the UK, I value the health service. We've all needed it. We all get sick. We all have accidents. You know, we need the health service to be there. I do not ever want to see a system where you have to buy insurance and then potentially you have to deal with an insurance claim agent who decides whether your treatment is experimental or whether your treatment is going to be allowed, or how much you have to pay towards it. So you can't get it anyway because you can't afford the copay. That is corrupt, morally bankrupt, in my opinion. And I find it really difficult to reconcile with a country that has a system like that in the modern world, which unfortunately is a lot of countries, you know.
Yeah. Or going in debt. I mean, in America, you can lose your house. You know, you can go into massive debt. There's only recently been legislation to put a cap on the interest that is charged for medical debt. Medical debt is one of the greatest debts that people have in the United States. I mean, it's really crippling to people.
That's unthinkable to me. The idea that, you know, maybe in my 50s, there's a lot of cancer in my family, and it does worry me. And I think if I was living in a different country, that I could lose, you know, my home, or that I might have to die because I don't have insurance. Or, that's absurd. That's absurd in a civilized society, that anyone is going to die because of lack of money.
Right. And people have it a bit reversed here, and the rhetoric. And, you know, that's why it's so important we have these conversations about understanding, you know, how these systems work, single payer systems, you know, how they function. And, you know, I want to touch on one thing before we get into the deep dive on what the demands are, because I realized as listening to you, one thing that we hadn't talked about before was the training of nurses, the education system, and the cost of education. So nurses here may spend $100,000 for a 2-year program, to not even a bachelor's level program to become an RN, or it could be at a publicly funded university, which might still be $10,000 to $20,000. I myself went to a public education system, which ended up being a couple $1,000s. So can you just touch on that a little bit? Because I want our folks in America to understand how that system works. It's different.
Okay, so there is variations throughout the United Kingdom on this in terms of education. Generally speaking, though, now to become a nurse, you need a Bachelor of Science. So previously you could do a diploma, and the people that done a diploma were given the option to do a bit of further education in recent years, so they could top it up to the degree. To do a degree, in Scotland, your tuition fees are paid. So
Wow.
it's free if you're a Scottish citizen. So you can go train to be a nurse and you don't come out with any debt, not for the education anyway. And also we will give you £10,000 a year whilst you're studying for living expenses.
What?
Are you accepting humans in your country?
Come on.
So I want everybody to really hear that. So if you're a Scottish citizen, your tuition is fully paid and you're going to get a stipend of £10,000 a year for living expenses.
Yep.
Okay. Got that. That's great.
Yeah.
Why did my family emigrate? Gosh darn.
But I will say in England, it's not the case. So if you train in England, you will pay, I think, 60,000 for that education.
Wow.
And I don't know if they have a bursary now. I think that they do. They did previously, but there was years in between where the government scrapped the bursary. But I think they recognise that a lot of people are not going to train, because a lot of people that come into nursing are adult, like mature students. And so they have homes, they have children. And so I think they recognise that the numbers have fallen because they weren't providing that financial support, because a mature student needs some money so that they can still feed their kids, pay their rent, you know. So in Scotland, I have to say, we are more enlightened and we recognise that. I do believe the Scottish Government is trying to encourage people into nursing so that we can solve the recruitment crisis that we've got.
So, and the crisis is kind of what has led us all to this point, right?
Yeah.
Could you just, in what you think, go over what's the strike about? Kind of what are you, I guess, is the terms demands, Adrienne, is that what you say? Demands? Like, what are the demands of?
Let's see, ask.
Okay,
I guess it's a softer way. We say demands.
I like demands. Yeah. What would you like out of this situation?
So the strike itself is multifactorial, but what I would say the main things is a restorative pay rise. So that would be, right now, inflation is sitting around, I think, 12%. So we're looking for inflation, but the Royal College is asking for 5% above inflation to try and attract people into the profession.
Okay.
So that is the main ask. But there's two factors, I would say, to the strike, and that is pay and patient safety. So, for example, we don't have enough nurses. Therefore, services are not as safe. Waiting lists are backing up. But realistically, they're one and the same. They're intrinsically linked, because to have better staffing ratios and better patient safety, we must have more nurses. And to have more nurses, we need to pay more for the job. So it's all linked.
Yeah, and that sounds exactly like what most of the strikes are here. Is one, I want to be paid, like, and then everyone freaks out that nurses don't just want to volunteer their time. And then two, like we want this to be safe, right? Because I want to go into work and be able to actually do my job, and I can't do my job if I am running around like a chicken with my head cut off, just trying to like keep up. Are there universal ratios for patient ratios in the NHS system, or it's kind of like whatever we have is what we have?
Right. So in terms of ratios, the only place I believe that has mandated legal ratios is Wales.
Okay.
I believe they brought in legal minimums a few years back. Everywhere else, no, there isn't. They do calculate what they say is the staff that you need. And I would question those calculations every day of the week, because what they say is, you're not short-staffed, you've got this many people. Yeah, but that's not the amount of people that's required to do this job well and provide the standard of patient care that we believe patients deserve, you know. But no, there's nothing written into law, because, well, I think they would be very reluctant to put it into law because they can't actually enact it. They don't have enough nurses to do it.
Yeah, we don't. That's the same thing. I think one of our states California has laws that say this is what the ratios have to be, and everyone else isn't going to touch that with a 10-foot pole because they're like, well, these are the recommendations.
Yeah,
But they know they won't be able to ever meet them. So it's like they don't.
And that took that was 10 years in the making of research. And at the time, there was a lot of actual research going on around nursing. But, the hard part is if that research isn't funded, then you don't have the academic background to support the argument. So there's some kind of a manipulation in the background on the research that happens also within healthcare. So if you don't have research, then how are you going to back up that patients have better outcomes if they have more nursing staff or more nursing hours or supplemental hours? One thing that we've dealt with here in the United States over the last 10 years, I would say, is, let's say critical care. They may have had, a secretary. They may have had their own nursing aides, a couple nursing aides. L&D may have had scrub techs, secretaries, the birth register person, aides. All of that's been scrapped. So basically, just eliminated in most hospitals, and that's just been happening year after year. And there is a real impact to that. So even if hospitals are meeting the ratio in California, that's where I worked, is in California, we didn't have transporters, we didn't have a break nurse, we didn't have secretaries often, or not enough aides, etc. What is that structure like in where you're at? And I know you're not in acute care, but if you can speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the NHS, as you can imagine, in wards, you've obviously got your trained nurses like me, and then you have nursing assistants, what you guys might call, I don't know, healthcare support workers. Mm-hmm. So they are not they're not college educated, but they are hands-on. They help with things like meeting patient needs, like washing patients, helping patients get something to eat, things like that. You've got porters, so they take patients from, say, the ward to their therapy, round at gyms, or I'm trying to think, really anywhere. If they're moving from one ward to another in a hospital, we've got porters that would do that.
It's still the most amazing people to me, that they can steer beds. Hands down. Like, I don't know.
It's the chairs in the UK. It's the chairs. I have to go backwards with them anytime. I just say to the patients, "Buckle up. I'm a terrible driver."
That's what I say to them. Like, I don't know. I know what injuries you have now. We'll see what you have when we get there. All right, let's go.
I don't know what they make those chairs of, but they are terrible. They are terrible.
It's always like bumper cars.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's like supermarket trolleys,
I'm glad it's a universal thing then. It's not just
it's strange. It's strange, but it is. Something is wrong with those chairs. The wheels don't wheel. The wheels don't wheel. But yeah, so we've got porters. You do have reception, but they don't work that many hours from what I've seen. They could be doing with a lot more admin support, because that means that nurses are doing things like answering phones and, like, not that we're above answering phones, but obviously every extra thing you'll know yourself if they are pulling a lot of your support staff means there is more for you to do.
And delegation. Do what you can do and do that. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, it just could be done by someone else. So in the sake of, we already don't have the people. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we've got caterers as well. And like our uniforms, at least in Scotland, we have like the uniform laundry. So you also have people that work there, like they will launder people's uniforms for them. And if your uniform needs adjusted, they will sew it.
What?
And things like that,
awesome.
And laundry services is one area that has pretty much been outsourced in all hospitals now. They used to have their own laundry services in-house. That's one area. A lot of outsourcing has happened. Kitchen, now there's not really food cooked in the hospitals anymore. Hospital I worked in used the same system that prisons used, where food is just pre-cooked and it's brought in steamed. So those are areas that really get outsourced quite often. And that really, for us in hospitals in the union setting, that really degrades our power. But yeah, this option of like laundering uniforms is mind-blowing. Outside of OR, outside of the surgical suite.
They launder your uniform. They can. Not everyone uses it, but you can get your uniforms laundered in a lot of places. And when you first get your uniform, they're quite standard. So if you need your trousers like sewn, you go in and they'll sew all your trousers up to the right length for you and stuff. And we have housekeepers. All our cleaning is in house. So we have housekeepers that make the patients tea and coffee, that keep our wards clean and hygienic. And I think like caterers as well. Some of the stuff I'm sure is brought in, but they also do cook on site. I think, as I've mentioned, most people, apart from security, there's not much security at our hospitals. There could maybe be done with more security. Not so much in the area that I work in, but I think, emergency department, they can get it really tough. Yeah.
And do you have, so just as far as like the scope and practice of nursing, do you have respiratory therapists that do breathing treatments, or do nurses do that?
So we would have physiotherapists, and they say, for example, if you had a patient who needed chest physio, then we would make a referral. So we can refer to like our NHS speech and language therapy, physiotherapy, podiatrists for patients who need their nails cut and things like that. And then more specialised nurses, for example, if you needed like a cancer specialist nurse or a diabetic specialist nurse, we can refer for all of that for more specialised input. Yeah.
Gotcha. So it's a little bit different model than we have here in some ways. I would say the housekeepers I've worked with have definitely offered to get coffee and tea for patients, but that's not part of their job. It's often us and as nurses. And I think, one of the things that the public we need to help them understand in all countries is that it's important for nurses to have what's called transformational relationships with patients, not transactional, meaning we need to do more than just doing a check off list of duties.
Yeah.
Part of what is a healing property of nursing is that relationship and the time to develop a relationship with our patients to do that assessment, because there's so much that we learn. And especially like in America, we have a lot of different assessments now, human trafficking assessments, suicidal assessments, all of that. But then if you're just running around and spread so thin, you don't really have that time. And part of our role, and like you're explaining, is we have to be critical thinkers, and it actually does take time where you need to sit there and okay, let me just put this together. What's happening with this patient? What might they need on discharge? What are their needs here?
Yeah.
What's missing in the picture here? Oh, I've got to call the family member. It is so important that we have the bandwidth to do that, to have the best outcomes for patients. And I hope folks understand that in the UK and Scotland as well, that you have to have those support services, and you've got to have appropriate safe staffing levels of nurses.
You do. And I think you touched on something there that really is key. When I was first learning how to be a nurse, the first year, where you're trying to bring together the basics, even though I didn't work in acute care, there's still so much to learn. But, contending with that and also trying to figure out how to bring it all together. I was very task oriented. That's my personality. I'm a checklist person, and struggle a lot with anxiety. Have I forgotten things? And sometimes I needed to remember that the thing that brought me into the job was that I love talking to people, and in a conversation with a patient, you can learn more than if you had read everything that was sent over in a transfer letter.
Yep.
It all starts to make sense. It might take 15 minutes, but in that 15 minutes, they're going to tell you what they feel is the reason why they're there, how it came about, the things that haven't helped them in the past. You get that so quickly from a face-to-face conversation, assessing things like that. And so when I was progressing, I had to learn how to almost balance my obsessive need to tick things off a list and remember the reason I'm there in the first place.
Right, because we might be the last person that has a conversation that's meaningful with a patient. I worked on an open heart unit where we did pre-open hearts and post after they came out of critical care. And there were patients that I was the last person that had a conversation with them because they didn't make it through on the other side. And I remember those patients, you know, and I think, gosh, I am so grateful that we had that time and I got to know this person and know who they are, and they were able to express however they were feeling, you know, and people, you know, think about that in the public watching this, that how do you want that experience to be for yourself or your loved one? Do you want your loved one to be on a conveyor belt, an assembly line, like a, you know, a Ford factory, or do you want to have this qualitative experience of caring and nurturing and relational, you know, transaction, you know, transformational kind of experience? Because that matters, and it is part of the healing process.
It's a huge part of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think actually the public here, they know that. You know, when they talk about nursing and why they love our profession, they talk about the nurse that was there who held their relative's hand when they passed away. They talk about the nurse that hugged them when they were there and a relative died. They talk about the cup of tea that was made for them by one of the housekeepers that just made them feel cared for. You know, it's the human element of what we do, and that is why nursing is respected, and why people do support us in general. Is because they know what we bring to the job, you know.
And you can't do it if you don't have enough staff, right? Which all comes back to exactly like why there's strikes going on, because if you don't have the staff to do it, then you can't
give that element to the job. And that essentially, even though nursing has become, and it has obviously changed over the years, it's become more and more a skilled profession. And a lot of people, I know this is a traditional argument, is it a profession or is it a vocation? I say it's a profession, but that doesn't mean that we can't be caring and compassionate and good at what we do on a human level, whilst being educated, understanding the evidence base, and bringing that professionalism to the role.
Absolutely. I mean, the patient acuity, I came into nursing as patient acuity was really changing. I came in 2007. And, you know, it's really important for people to understand those patients that are now in ICU would have been long gone, not made it, right? The patients that are on med surg or telemetry, cardiac monitored, those would have been critical care patients, you know, 20 years ago. The level of illness, because of technology we can keep people alive at such a higher level of disease state than before. And that is often something that isn't talked about. And we are professionals, our skill level, the time. I mean, I know there's just been so many times where I had to do research and, okay, what's going on with this patient? What is this disease process? Oh, I don't know anything about dengue fever. What is that? Or botulism poisoning because of some tainted heroin, which we only have 3 cases in the United States a year. You know, something that was so random, and the time we need to take, we have to continually be upping our skills to take care of these patients at any level. Wound care is very complicated. I mean, you know, socioeconomic issues and solutions, very complicated. Case managers have to have a lot more, you know, tools in their tool belt. So it's really important that, you know, we contextualize and continue to contextualize what the patient level is, you know, because that is often missed, I find. So I want to clarify another thing about the bargaining process, just getting back to that. So here in America, we probably do contracts every, you know, we would do like a 3-year, a 4-year, maybe a 5-year on the long end in unions, mostly 3 to 4 years. So when you're saying that there's a restorative pay 12% and a 5%, right? Then is that for just 1 year? What's that time frame? Because I think that also is a little confusing.
Okay, let's cut the interview right there. And don't forget that the other half of this interview is going to be over on Adrian's channel. So please hop right over there. The link is in my description to go check it out, as well as Siobhan's information, where to find her Twitter, her Instagram, all of the things that you can follow her on, as well as the hashtags to raise awareness for what is going on over there so that we can show solidarity for our nurses in the NHS. So please do go check out that second half of the interview. We talk a lot more about like the financials. How much do nurses in the NHS make? What does it look like day to day versus being a nurse in the US, maybe over in the NHS, and just more details of the strike in general and kind of the climate that is surrounding all of this, what the public thinks. You'll find that over there. It's absolutely fascinating. Huge, huge thank you to Adrian and Siobhan for helping. They really coordinated this whole thing. I just showed up at the last minute. And if you have any experience with, if you work in the NHS, if you know anything about it, please do let us know in the comments what you know, because this is very much not my thing, but I think nurses supporting nurses is something we can all get behind and we can show support for each other. So my friends, always remember that you are not alone. You can do the hard things, and I'll see you next time. Where did we go? You are not alone. You can do hard things, and you're more than enough. There we go. It's very early on a Saturday. Adrian dragged me here very early. She's like 8 a.m. That sounds fine. Anyway, I'll see you next time. Bye.